Welcome to Dot Social, the first podcast to explore the world of decentralized social media. Each episode, host Mike McCue talks to a leader in this movement, someone who sees the Fediverse's tremendous potential and understands that this could be the internet's next wave. Today, Mike's talking to Johannes Ernst, one of the founders of FediForum and the CEO of Dazzle Labs, a startup focused on the Fediverse, identity, privacy, personal data, and AI. Johannes is also a force behind the FediTest test suite and the Fediverse Developer Network. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
Johannes Ernst, welcome to Dot Social.
Mike, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It is great to have you here. I am so excited about the upcoming FediForum. I've gone to 2 of them so far, and I found them to just be terrific. I love the grassroots nature of FediForum. And the way you run the conference, the way people are able to participate and talk about a lot of different topics that are really vital for the health of the Fediverse. I absolutely love it, and I'm really looking forward to the 3rd one as well.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. Certainly, we have been. I think the FediForum has exceeded our expectations in terms of what we were able to accomplish so far. And as you said, the 3rd one is coming up in just a couple of weeks on March 19th and 20th. Again, online. We are expecting again a international audience. It's scheduled to be suitable for European and America's kind of audience. That's where most of the people are located around the world. Also, we have had some people from Japan demonstrating software in the middle of the night. So it must have a certain pull. Otherwise, people wouldn't do that, I would assume.
I've found it to be just a fantastic way to understand what's going on and to think about where we're going with our own product work. When you look at this upcoming FediForum, it's coming at a really important moment for the Fediverse, where it feels as though we're on the cusp of a massive new wave of growth. What do you see as some of the most important topics of discussion that you're hoping we're going to get into?
So, I'm just an unconference organizer. So whoever, as Kalia says, whoever comes are the right people. And whatever subjects they bring are the right subjects. So we are not trying to enforce that. On the other hand, I'm also a participant in this emerging market or ecosystem, or whatever you want to call it. FediForum is really just a side project. I have other projects, including my main project, Dazzle, which is playing there. But so I have an opinion around this one. We've been thinking about, where is this market? Where is this movement? Who are the people who would come to FediForum in order to accomplish what? How will it be different 6 months from now? We've been doing a bunch of work around this, and if you indulge me, I want to lay this out a little, if that's okay. So the way I think about it is, and my favorite book on that subject is now ancient book, Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore and what came out of McKenna back in the early 90s, I think it was such a long time ago, about how technology markets evolve. And the Fediverse at this point in time is very clearly still in an early market. There's no majority yet. This is not a mainstream market yet. And Jeff talks in the early market with 2 phases, the way I recall it. One of them, we have the technology enthusiasts that start with a new product, with a new movement. These are the people that tinker with the protocols, that solder together the boards, that that are geeks, that basically figure out something and say, "Hey, look, Mom, it worked." And then there's the second early market, which is the visionaries, where somebody who isn't a tinkerer looks at it and says, if this actually works, this could do something pretty amazing. And do something amazing for my customers or for my community, but they're not the tinkerers anymore. They want to accomplish something with the technology. And at least that's my understanding how the model works. And I think the Fediverse is sort of right at the cusp between these 2 early market phases. I think we are now, the conversation is now changing from the technology conversation to the what can this do in the world. And hopefully a year down the road, we then make it through that early market and the first mainstream adopters show up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is important because just having an open version of Twitter or some other walled garden social media product in and of itself is not going to be a mainstream widely adopted thing, right? What we need are new kinds of experiences that just aren't possible in the walled garden worlds, or have a lot more friction to ever even happening, right? I think that's the key thing that we need is we have to move from this world of, hey, we have an open version of Twitter to we are now interacting with content and people in fundamentally new and better ways. And when you look at Twitter, it feels like the DOS command line before Windows or something. It's something that I think, there is this like major jump that I think is going to have to happen.
One of the things that Fediverse brings that a closed network generally hasn't done so far is what we could call heterogeneous interoperability, meaning that software interacts with other software that's different, truly different, not the same. From my perspective, it's not all that interesting to have two alternate implementations of Twitter and then now interact with each other through federations. Okay, fine. But, it's both more or less the same product. But now if one of them is a microblogging tool and another thing is a forum or a wiki or a photo sharing site, and they can interoperate, we can all of a sudden do use cases that are simply not possible in closed social networks, except if somebody like Instagram were to basically just put all the features of all the other products into Instagram, which I don't think is feasible, right? So we can now support use cases that are more heterogeneous. I don't think they have been quite articulated yet what they are and who exactly wants them and what the usability is, and there's lots of technical work to be done too. But this is I think the kind of conversations that are beginning to happen because people look at the unique possibilities that the Fediverse allows, and this is one of them that goes beyond just the fact that it is decentralized. Now we're seeing much more polished things, things that are much better thought through, and some actually genuine innovations where people are going beyond Twitter and going beyond what is there and trying out new things that now they suddenly can do. And this is, I think, another one of the really, really important values of the Fediverse. It enables and supports innovations by innovators much more so than any other environment. And my favorite example here is actually, if you look back into history, Zynga and Facebook. If you remember, we were all playing the farming game on Facebook at some point. And it was great because Farmville, exactly, because Zynga could say, oh, we have an innovation here, which is some kind of collaborative or social kind of game, and we are going to put this into the network. And of course, Zynga was very successful, and at some point it became too successful, and that was the end of Zynga because Facebook had the ability to veto their business. So if the same thing had happened in the Fediverse, the story would have ended differently. They would have said, oh, we are really innovators in gaming, but we don't want to build our own network, social network, which is what they did back then, except that they jumped on Facebook. And Facebook at some point pulled out their veto. Well, in the Fediverse, there is no such veto. There is no central entity that can say, Zynga or anybody else, you cannot do that anymore. And so as an innovator, I can do things like social games and so many other things without having to build my own network because it's already there and everybody's helping me build it because everybody has an incentive to build the same network. It's not owned by any one corporation. And then nobody can ever kick me out. And they cannot even put a toll booth on it. It's not like, all of a sudden somebody wants 30% of your revenue or some such thing. It is that you can do what you want to do. Of course, you have to convince the individual server operators to actually carry your content and not block you. But that is a completely different story if there is thousands and thousands of server operators out there that independently moderate their own servers, instead of one entity saying, nope, you can't do this anymore because you're too successful for my own business. And so we're beginning to see some of these things in the Fediverse. This is the early days.
Yeah. I think your point, is a big one here, that like, what about all those other companies that could have been the next Zynga, that could have been the next Pinterest, that can't get started because, they didn't have they have to build their own social graph. Exactly. With the Fediverse, it changes that, right? So you can have more Pinterests, more Zyngas, more Spotifys actually happen. And I do think that is a huge dimension. I think of it as decentralized innovation. Yes. You have decentralized innovation happening around a common model, common social graph, a common mechanism for interoperating. And then that just opens up the doors for all sorts of new ideas that, typically weren't either A, possible, or B, you would end up having to spend so much of your energy on just building the social graph that you had to put a very relatively small amount of energy into whatever the big new idea was. That's changed now. And so I do think we're going to start to see from these grassroots sources a lot of really big new ideas. And I'm really looking forward to that.
I think you can go down industry by industry and you say, whatever you have there, if you have in your product, in your website, if you have a thing that you would think of as a social object, or I think of it as a social object, an object that more than one person would like to interact with, whether that's a game or a product listing or a newspaper article or whatever it is, does it make sense to socially enable this object right there to be part of the Fediverse, as opposed to taking this link and copy pasting it into a Facebook feed or into something where you have no control of whether it's ever be shown to anybody or in the context of which it's being shown, and you're being charged for a lot. So I think that the really more interesting part, this next phase of the Fediverse, is not so much we have like in closed social networking platforms, we have the social networking product and everybody sort of tries to connect to it somehow, but the product goes away. The network becomes just something that's always there. And so instead, we have a social network. We are seeing we have endpoints that become social. And if you look like you're back into the history of the Fediverse, before it was even called the Fediverse, it was called the social web. That was the term that people used. What if we made the web social? What if every website was social? And I think we're coming back to this one. We're seeing a ton of interesting projects around that. So it happens very rarely in the history of technology that you have a platform worth trillions of dollars, as in case of social networking as a whole, that apparently could maybe actually dissipate and disappear because the value goes one level up, where there's all of these applications now natively talking to each other. And I think that's the great proposition from a business perspective, and that's why I'm mostly an entrepreneur rather than a conference organizer.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Your point about the applications and the network is the application in some ways, right? I think that's a really good point. What will bring people to the Fediverse or the social web? It's going to be the other people that are there,
right.
And as well as the applications that people want to use, which brings people. And so you have this combination of new kinds of applications, as well as groups of different kinds of people: journalists, scientists, singers, et cetera. As these different groups start to come to the network. And then those folks are able to interact and use with these different applications. I do think you're going to get this kind of critical mass where people will realize that, like, look, this is the social web is this connection of everyone, and they're all using different applications, but you can seamlessly interact with all these different groups. Versus if you go to a walled garden, it's only some people. using one very specific application, right? I think
Yes.
that's a very different way of thinking than how we're used to thinking about social media.
And absolutely, the point of a social network today, of a social network platform, is to optimize, the share price of the operator of this particular social network. So the objective, that's the objective, right? It means, more clicks, more engagement, more enragement, more I think of it manipulated content, because you have to manipulate your users and your advertisers in order to optimize your share price. That's just the way it works. It's inherent in the structure of this. And so social interactions have a lot of value, far more than whatever the value is that a particular social network operator can extract from it and optimizes for. And so I think what's happening here is, my friend Doc Searles, years ago, he started to talk about Linux, and one of his phrases was on the question, how do you make money with Linux? And his answer was, you do not make money with Linux. You make money because of Linux. So you're not trying to charge for the operating system, but given that the operating system exists, what can you do now that you couldn't do before? And that's the question we need to ask ourselves in the Fediverse. It's not how do you monetize the Fediverse? No, we don't want to monetize that. Actually, nobody wants to monetize the Fediverse. We want the Fediverse to be free and accessible for everybody. But now, if we have this and it's free, accessible, what is not possible that wasn't possible before? And most notably, it's all the use cases that do not contribute to the revenue stream of the platform operator. And I think that's the business strategic kind of question. What are those? How do I apply in my industry? And then, what we need to do as the people who are trying to make this future happen is, of course, there's a lot of work, which is we got to, go down and say one industry at a time. One, set of use cases at a time, one community at a time. What do these people really need, right? And now let's make sure we build the solutions for that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a misnomer that sometimes people ask, well, what's the business model for the Fediverse? And that's like, what's the business model for the web? There's going to be many different business models that I think will emerge based on the different applications and the different communities that are adopting it, right? And that's kind of the beauty of this, is that there's going to be lots of different ways ultimately for business models to materialize here. Mm-hmm. When you look at the next set of, you said industry or applications or communities, what are you focused on, with your entrepreneurial hat on, that you're excited about?
So I think news is a very obvious one, because there is a perfect storm in the news, in the overall news information fact sharing kind of world, and we at FediForum we had various sessions about this. For example, we had the gentleman from the BBC come by last September and ran us through his thinking or their thinking in why they're doing this and what they hope to accomplish in really in detail. And one of the things we're trying to do is bringing more people out of this industry together to find each other and figure out what would this actually mean for us as an industry to adopt this, because I think it's a little hard to see how this can be adopted one company at a time. This is a kind of thing where a lot of similar thinking has to occur. So news is one of them. Another one is, as boring as it sounds, governmental related communications. If you're in a government and you try to communicate with your citizens from something as simple as, the big street will be closed next Tuesday, to, whatever, we have plans for a new firehouse, whatever. How do you actually do this today? And I think I see no reason as a citizen that this communication between the government and me should be mediated and moderated and downvoted and upvoted and mixed up with ads by some platform overload attempting to basically optimize their own business as part of what my government wants to tell me. So there is possibilities to put direct communications in there.
One of the topics of discussion that I'm sure is going to come up is probably going to be the recent spam attacks that have been happening in the Fediverse. Do you have any thoughts on that? As you've been talking to folks?
This is a great example, because the Fediverse is so different from so many other places where this kind of problem has occurred before, and that is that there is no one authority. Nobody can do anything unilaterally. It's all a matter of people trying to figure out things together, right? If Facebook had a spam attack of some kind, then somebody in the hierarchy of Facebook say, okay, I heard 3 proposals, we do number 2. Go. That's not how it works in the Fediverse, right? We have to all figure this out together. And one of the things why I really thought we needed FediForum, this community needed FediForum, is so that people can find each other first. Who are the other interesting people who talk about this? And then we can connect with each other and start projects from it. And there's several projects that have started already out of FediForum. So one of them, for example, is we got a developer network started. We had a session where a bunch of developers were in there and said, we really need to communicate better. There is protocol problems, and we need to find each other so we can debug things together. Spam would be one of the use cases for this, but there's many other things like let's create a plan.
This particular spam attack was relatively simplistic. Some people say it was some high school students and so on goofing around. But there's going to be much more sophisticated spam attacks as the Fediverse continues to grow, and that is something that is going to be critical for crossing the chasm. Right? We've got to be able to, as a industry, deal with this. And I think this is Threads and some of the other larger businesses that have been around and dealt with these kinds of problems for a while. Flipboard, certainly. There are things that these companies can bring to the mix, whether those are AI tools, open source approaches for dealing with detecting spam, ways to enlist perhaps some of the army of moderators that are over at Threads, in Facebook, Meta, and so on, to bring those people into the mix to help leverage some of that. There's a lot of opportunity to address this, but we've got to talk this through. We have to figure this out.
Right. In one of the things the Fediverse brings from a technical architecture perspective, and even from a business architecture perspective, is this principle of modularity. You can actually focus on one thing because the network will provide the rest of it. You don't have to do it all. And so take spam, right? Or take anything like that, or take moderation. Actually, moderation might be an easier example. Let's say you have a gigantic social network as one of the platforms, and you're trying to figure out what to do about moderation. The truth is that you will not make people happy, because whatever you do, there will be a very large number of people who's going to be very unhappy, even if you try the best you can. And they might not always do that, but even if you tried. So, but now here in the Fediverse, we don't have to have a single policy. Every server can have their own policy, which means that the people who feel safe in one's environment but not another have the ability to go into a place where they are safe. Right? And while in a single policy across the entire social network, that simply it's really not possible. And I think it's really important to think of it from an international and from a multicultural perspective. Different cultures have different norms. And while we believe that every one of us believes that some norms are better than others, the fact of the matter is that there are different ones. And to a large extent, we simply have to respect that. And so the moderation policies should be different. And I think the whole notion of a global social network that has one set of policies, one set of business models, one set of features is something that is going to be very quaint in the future, because it doesn't reflect the way humanity is structured, right? Instead, what if anybody can come, any subject, any software, any moderation policy, any business model, and it all interoperates? It's so much more beautiful.
It's more messy, but more beautiful.
Yeah, but it's such a big thing. I mean, we in the history of humanity, we have never had products that had billions of users. I'm not sure that a product with the same one product with one feature set is the right answer for multiple billions of users. I don't think so, right? So now if we say we have products that have much smaller numbers of users, that's still very profitable, tens of millions maybe, but now can have hundreds of products. And it is probably possible that you find the right product for you.
It's interesting the way Bluesky handles moderation. I think there's a lot to learn from that as well. And I'm sure that's going to be another topic of discussion at FediForums, the Bluesky Federation work and, between threads federating with ActivityPub, with Bluesky and the bridge that's being built from Bluesky to the Fediverse, and then moderation. You've got kind of a perfect storm of things to navigate and talk through.
Yeah, there's a ton of different protocols, of course, popping up. You mentioned some of them. There's some more in the more crypto related protocols, but there's innovation all over the place. And the Fediverse, as we know it today, hasn't always been ActivityPub. There's other protocols that came before, and so some people say they're even better protocols. From my perspective, as a technologist, I care about what the protocols are and what they can do. But as somebody who ignores the technology occasionally, ultimately, it doesn't really matter. It's part of the plumbing. Whether there is a version 1 in HTTP or version 2 in HTTP matters to some people, but most people really don't care. So the question is more like, what's the network here? What can interoperate? And that's what I think of as the Fediverse. The Fediverse is when I can communicate with you, regardless what software we're using, without a middleman in the middle. That's the Fediverse, right? Because ActivityPub will, if it continues to be successful, it will get to version 2 and version 3, and there will be innovation all over the place, and that doesn't really matter as much as the overall network. And having, from my perspective, having Ryan, who wrote the bridge to Bluesky, is a great project because it grows a network in that definition.
Yeah, it was one of the more controversial things that's happened over the last few weeks. This concept of a bridge, and then how do you do you default on or default off to opt in or opt out? All of these kinds of discussions I think are really important for us to have. One of the things that is I think Ryan makes a very good point of in some of his blog posts is that networks are inherently about interoperability. That is what makes good networks. And so interoperability is something that should happen. The question, of course, is how. And, I think there's a whole set of discussions around, how do you enable interoperability, but also enable people to preserve an approach where they have their own network and they don't want that network to be somehow, intruded on. They want that network to be more private. They want that network to be more in their control, which is, of course, one of the great things about the Fediverse. The challenge, though, is that, you can't necessarily grow anything that's going to be like the social fabric for the web by doing lots and lots of tiny little mini networks. If you don't have interoperability, then there is no common layer, right? So these things are almost, juxtaposed. How do we enable both those use cases, right? And that I think is really, 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 really important at this moment, because if we stay kind of in this debate between this, or if we kind of gravitate to like, no, everything just needs to be by default private and people have to opt in to participating in these other networks, you're just never going to get this sort of dream of a global open social web. It just won't ever happen. So that's a critical moment, and threading through. I think Ryan has been, he's been the pioneer that's been, really getting a lot of abuse, I think, in some cases unfair, but, I think he's also, there's been a lot of really good, legitimate, high quality debate about this. And I think this is something that, I'm expecting will happen at FediForum, and it'll be good to have the debate happening with people live on the screen rather than just, threads and conversations So, but this is a big moment.
Yes, I think this is one of the reasons why have an actual event where people show up, even if it's only on screens, but they can see each other and interact with each other as human beings, makes a big difference over just leaving some mean comment that isn't entirely thought through. In particular, in the case of Ryan, I've known him for a very long time, and he's just about the nicest guy you could imagine. So abuse thrown, in his direction is just by default simply not correct, because he's so much nicer than I ever would be, for example. So I totally agree with what you say about this hairball. We have to figure out here how does global interoperability on one level relate to what some people call the freedom of association and non-association. And I think that people are more actually even concerned about the non-association than the association, right? There is plenty of sub-communities in the Fediverse who say, okay, if you have this political opinion, I cannot possibly interact with you. I never want to hear from you. Or if you have ever worked for this particular company, I will not interact with you. Or there's so many things, and that's fine, because we want to make possible for people to have their communities that they are comfortable with. So the question is, what are the technical and the product kind of implications for this? And I don't think we have an answer yet. As you said, this is an unresolved problem at this point. Personally, I believe, well, we need to have two things. One of it is on a technical level, the ability for anybody to relate to anybody if they want to. The ability, not the requirement, the ability. And then on the second level, we have the ability to limit this on a user level to what the user considers to be the right set of people they want to interact with. And I think, for example, one thing that is very fascinating to me is it's quite clear that there is sub-communities in the Fediverse that have difficult personal, emotional, psychological backgrounds, and they feel safe in this environment because certain things do not happen to them. There's no danger of this happening to them in their environment that they built up for themselves. They're very protective of this environment. Imagine you suffer from PTSD of some kind, and you really go into some kind of episode when certain things show up. If you have the ability in the Fediverse to say, this is not going to happen here, this is so beautiful, it will never happen on a commercial network. We need to protect these people, but I don't think that we should do this at the cost of avoiding or preventing global connectivity. So we need to do both. There's a challenge here. I think it can be solved. We have quite solved it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people began working in the Fediverse with the goal of being in control and having their own choice. And that needs to be preserved. And at the same time, yes, there needs to be the ability to have this global open social layer that will also benefit society in incredible new ways. And so there's a set of, as you said, product and design and expectation sort of approaches that I don't think there's that many of these things to think through, but there's a few. And I think if we can talk about those things and try to come up with a model that embraces both of these different, scenarios, and people can decide how they want to participate in the Fediverse in a more sort of private model versus a more public model. Yeah. I think that's going to be critical. And I do think that it's possible. I don't think this is like rocket science. A lot of this has to do with how you set the defaults in an instance. A lot of this has to do with being clear about when you join an instance, what is the stance of that instance, right? So you're joining this instance, that's the instance you're going to have your account on. It is, what is the expectations that instance is going to have? Is it inherently more open, or is it inherently more closed and protected? And there's nothing wrong with either one. But I do think when we run into problems is when
Right.
the expectations are misaligned. Wait, I joined this instance. Why are you federating with threads? I thought this was closed, Well, or I joined this instance. Why are you not federating with threads? Why are you making that decision for me? Right? That's a problem. I think that expectation setting is critical.
That expectation is absolutely critical. It also, we need more fine-grained controls. So there is a lot of product stuff that needs to happen. So, for example, it should be possible for users to say, I restrict comments to my post from people that I trust. For example, there, things like that. It shouldn't be possible to keep the post on my instance and not move it out. So there's controls that we need around this. And then also, I think there's larger governance questions too, and I want to bring this up just for a minute here. Is we have been trained to believe that there is this thing called a social media platform or an instance, and it is operated by somebody who is the total dictator, who unilaterally makes the decisions what happens in that instance. That's the model that we've been trained on in technology. But it, of course, doesn't have to be that way. It's a fundamental political question. We have different ways of organizing how to make decisions. And of course, we can put a dictator on top of our town, but maybe that's not quite the thing that most of us would want. So we can have different decision-making structures. And, my personal primary Fediverse account is in an instance called social.coop, which is a cooperative where I'm a member and I'm paying them a small amount of membership fee. Like everybody else, that money gets bundled and all decisions are made democratically. So, for example, on the questions of should or shouldn't we federate, or should this instance federate with threads, there was a long debate and there was a vote. And now we have a democratic process by which we decided what happens with a condition that says if the following things happen in the future, then we're going to reconsider. I think this is fundamentally a much better model than these overload models, even if it is just individual instances. It also goes to a funding model. I'm quite confident that instance will be around for a long time because it has an income stream. It costs me very little, like give them like $2 a month or some such thing, but they have a surplus in funds coming in. And there are certain copycats, or not copycats, but copies of the same model popping up around the world. And actually, the guy who started this, Nathan Schneider, is actually going to come again and have a conversation about, host a conversation about governance models at the next FediForum. I know that because he told me.
The FediForum is coming at a really good moment in time because there is a lot to talk about right now. In a collegial, collaborative way that I think, I've seen already in 2 FediForums so far. So yeah, this is a really, I'm really looking forward to this set of discussions.
That's great. You're trying to have a forum-like conversation, which means that everybody's welcome. All the subjects are welcome. We are not going to exclude somebody because they're working for a surveillance capitalist or anything like that. We want to have a conversation that includes everybody who's affected in one way or another. That means there are certain ground rules, including you can absolutely and you're expected to disagree with people, but you have to do this respectfully. And I think that is the only way that the world ever makes any progress in the Fediverse or otherwise. And so that's what we're trying to do.
It's no small task to gather these conversations and host them and have them happen. So yeah, I think it's great that you're putting this together. What else anything else, Johannes, that you want to tell us about what you're working on next? And things that people should be looking out for from you?
I think on a community, on a market level, we need more structures by which our community can organize itself and figure out things together. And FediForum is one sort of pillar in this. This is more of a discussion, a find each other kind of thing. But then we need to also have other structures. We need to reorganize a reinvigorated standards process. For example, we need to deal with things such as moderation standards and so forth. We need to have test suites. We need to have better documentation. We need to have lots of things like that. So we need to create more organizations like that, including coming up with there should be a place where the press can pick up the phone and say, I heard about this thing called Fediverse. Who do I talk to? Right? And then of course we need organizations that innovate like you do and other organizations do. And we need organizations that help the people who want to innovate, and that's where I see Dazzle as a role where we help companies that look at this and say it's early days, but there's something here. What can we do here where we can help them figure out what the lay of the land is, what the opportunities are. We built some rather interesting technology to support interacting in the Fediverse for organizations that need that. And so we just need to build out, a very thriving market. And my analogy is a little bit like the personal computer markets, as it was before it was all locked down into a very small number of suppliers. You had the graphics card manufacturer and the RAM manufacturer and the serial controller manufacturer and the box bundler and you had this ecosystem of all sorts of interlocking companies. And before the big overlords took over in the PC market as well. But we need to have something rather similar in the Fediverse. If back in the PC market, if we didn't have the motherboard guy and the RAM guy and the guy who installs the PC at the dentist's office, if we didn't have this entire ecosystem, nothing would have ever happened. You need all of them, and we need to build something rather similar here in the Fediverse. So another thing I'd like to see whether we put together is a group of entrepreneurs in the Fediverse, and it could be social entrepreneurs or commercial entrepreneurs, but the people who have this drive to make a change in the world, just to have them connect and compare notes, I think it would be extremely useful.
In my early days as an entrepreneur, it was the TED conference, TED number 4, I think it was, in Kobe, Japan, that I went to. That was kind of my breakout moment when I got a chance to meet some of my heroes and be able to actually, talk to other people in the industry that I had never met in person before, and it was a huge moment. Every entrepreneur needs it. Every entrepreneur needs that ability to get to a group of other people who are interested in, similar collections of ideas. And I think that it's the primordial ooze for creating companies, right? These conferences, these connections that are formed that to this day have helped me as an entrepreneur. So I'm sure that that's the case. Right. For me, one of my favorite things about working in the Fediverse is the people who are there and getting a chance to know them and learn from them and collaborate with them. It's awesome. So I'm glad that you've been able to pull this together, and, really excited to participate in March, as well as, all the other subsequent gatherings that I know you're going to be hosting. So thank you so much for talking with us.
Well, it was my pleasure.
Well, thanks so much for listening. You can find Johannes on Mastodon at j12t@social.coop. You can also follow Mike McCue on Mastodon at mike@flipboard.social. Big thanks to our editors, Rosanna Caban and Anne Lay. To learn more about what Flipboard's doing in the Fediverse, sign up via the link in this show's notes. Until then, we'll see you in the Fediverse.